Hello, this is Luther and Miranda, and we are here with another video on tzitzits. These are the tassels or the fringes that are commonly referenced in Scripture. You'll see a lot of Messianic or even Jewish believers wearing these, and so a lot of you are asking, like, what are those things? What's that all about? And so we're going to kind of break some things down and share some of our personal experience with
And if you come out of the church, you're probably like us, like, what is that? Is that for us? Are we supposed to be wearing it? We're Christians. And we're going to help you guys understand, if you believe in Jesus as the Messiah, Yeshua is his Hebrew name, then this pertains to you. So yeah, if you qualify yourself as a Christian, then this is definitely something to pray about and consider and maybe this is something you should begin to adapt.
Yeah. So let's dive right in. So the headline scripture when you're talking about tzitzits, and I know nobody can see the whiteboard. I've got a lot of information on there, and you probably can't see any of it.
And he writes really tiny.
Yep. So if you're interested in having the notes from the whiteboard, if you guys want to send me an email through our contact information on YouTube, I would be happy to email a screenshot of that to you. So that's the plan for the whiteboard until we come up with something a little better. But until then, just bear with me. I'll be referencing a lot. So I can either look at the whiteboard or I can look at notes, one or the other. But anyway, so tzitzits. Our headline scripture is Numbers 15, 37 through 41. And I'm going to read that. All right, 15, 37. And the Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the people of Israel, instructing them to make throughout all their generations tzitzit, or tzitziot, on the corners of their garments, and to put with the tzitzit on each corner a blue thread. It is to be a tzitzit for you to look at and thereby remember all of Adonai's commands and obey them, so that you won't go around wherever your own heart and eyes lead you and prostitute yourself." That's an interesting choice of words there. "But it will help you remember and obey all my laws and be holy for your God. I am Adonai your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt in order to be your God. I am Adonai your God." So pretty interesting. There's a lot going on there. For context, if we were to go back just a little bit, we see the story is that there was a man who was collecting firewood on the Sabbath. Now, God had given the command that we don't work on the Sabbath, right? And so the people were kind of disregarding that command, and this man was taken out of the camp and stoned. So pretty severe punishment. But then the Lord gives this tzitzit command. He says, "Look, I'm going to give you something, a tool, so that you will help you to remember the commandments, so you don't just go do whatever you want to do, right? Because I want you to be a holy, set-apart people."
Yeah.
Okay? So let's break down this passage in Numbers 15, 37, all about the tassels, right? So what was the command? The command was for all the generations, okay? Now, a lot of times we hear the argument, well, Jesus came and he put an end to all that. Well, you don't see that. Even Jesus wore tassels. So if he came to put an end to it, why did he wear tassels? Okay? It's kind of a weak argument. It says, for all your generations. And again,
it doesn't say until the Messiah comes.
Yeah, it doesn't say that.
It doesn't give an ending point, so we're putting an ending where the scriptures did not give an ending. And if you know the end of the Bible, it says, do not add or take away from any part of Scripture.
Yeah,
so we can't change where it says all generations. So if you consider yourself a believer of the God of the Bible, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you are part of that generation. Well, you're called to be part of that generation. Whether you choose to live accordingly, that's a choice you make.
Yeah.
And that's where we're teaching you, how do you live accordingly to become part of that, which a lot of the churches have left this part out.
Yeah. Another point is, another argument I should say, is that, well, that's for the Jews only, that's for the Israelites only. But I would remind people that there's Scripture talks about how the Gentiles, believers like us, are grafted in with the true vine, with the branch of Israel, right? So by being grafted in, we become a part of them,
Right.
Okay, so if this command is just for them and we're grafted in, then by inference that means this command is for us.
So our job's not to get them to become like us.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's the other way around.
It's the other way around. We become like them. Maybe then the Jews that are yet to believe in the Messiah will start to believe in the Messiah. If they start to see that we are actually becoming like them, believing in the Messiah, then maybe they'll believe in Jesus as the Messiah.
Yeah, yeah. So the command was for all generations. Now, another part of that command was that you have to have a cord of blue, and it says on each corner of your garment, which traditionally would say four tassels, right? A lot of the attire in that day and age was like a robe or some type of garment, and then it would have, you know, these delineated corners on it, and then they would tie tassels on each corner, right? So now a lot of times you may see some of these, and we'll take a look at some before we're done here, but they have specific knot patterns that represent certain things, and all that is traditional. Really, to satisfy the biblical command, you just have to have a tassel of however.
Two tassels. Because it's easier. You gotta have two tassels.
Four, typically.
You should have four,
Yeah.
representing the four corners of the earth. But to fulfill the commandment, you need to have two.
Yeah. So you have to have your tassels, and they have to have a cord of blue in them. So
Yeah,
that's very
wearing four
important.
is really cool because it represents the four corners of the earth. So when you wear four, you're really setting yourself apart. You're setting yourself. It's really cool when you really start to understand just the meaning of what a tassel really means, and to represent the four corners of the earth. You're representing the world, and this promise that God gave to this land. This is our land. He's promised us. This is our world.
You also, another reason why you have traditionally four is that would cover all sides. Again, kind of like a reference to the four corners, but it's a total encompassment of that individual. So,
Yep.
so also, and it's for you. This is interesting. So, just last Shabbat we had we talked about some of the laws and some of the things like that, and there's different laws that are, what's the word I'm looking for? It escapes me. Anyway, there's laws that are kind of, they're a witness type law, right? So, yeah, they signify something else, and they're symbolic in nature.
It's more of your lifestyle and how you live.
Yeah. So the tassels, it's for you. It's a tool, it's a function that helps you to remember the commandments, but it's also a witness of your relationship to the Lord.
Yeah, I like to compare it to your wedding ring. So when you get married, you get a ring. This signifies the vow, the commitment, and the relationship that you have with your spouse. Our tassels are the same way. It signifies a relationship we have with the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We are coming into covenant promise with Him. We're coming in and saying, yes, I want to serve you. I'm recognizing you as my king, the Lord of my life. There's so much to it when you begin to wear the tassels, because pride will not want you to wear them. Mm-hmm. The enemy will do whatever he can to keep you from obeying, because he knows when you choose to obey, at that point you're protected. You're guarded, you're protected. Nothing comes in unless God has allowed it to come into your life at that point, because you are in the safe place. Obeying the commandments of the Lord is the safe place to live.
Yeah, it is a safe place to live. So the command is for you, it's for the people. It's a reminder for you to do all the commandments of the Lord, right? To not just mental assent, but to actually do them, okay? And it's also a remedy from everybody going their own way. And when everybody goes their own way, that's lawlessness.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
And the scripture talks about, depart from me, you who work lawlessness.
I never knew you.
I never knew you. Yeah, he said, we
scary.
cast out demons in your name, we heal the sick in your name.
But he said, I never knew you.
He said, I never knew
so
you.
So you could do all the things.
Lawlessness.
You could do all the things, but still he could say, I never knew you. Yeah. And that's by lawlessness.
Yeah. So not a good place. So the tassels are, I jokingly like to say it's the messianic equivalent of a what would Jesus do bracelet, right? So you look at your tassel, what would God have me do in this situation, or what are the commands, that kind of thing. So now we said it has to have a blue cord in it, What's special about that? Why does it have to be a blue cord, right? Okay. God could have picked any other color. He could have just said, do whatever you want. But no, he said a blue cord. Now, that's found, there's a reference to that in Exodus 24:10, and I'm going to go there and read that. Yeah, Exodus 24:10. And they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet was something like a sapphire stone, pavement as clear as the sky itself. Okay? So that's where we get this blue or this sky blue or this sapphire color cord, right? Because it represents the throne, at the feet of the Messiah, at the feet of the Lord. Also, there is some traditional teaching that would suggest that the actual Ten Commandments were written on 2 tablets of sapphire stone, right? So, I don't know how, I'm probably dating myself, but, when Charlton Heston came down with the 2 tablets of stone, right, and they look like granite or something like that, tradition would, Judaic tradition would say that those were actually sapphire, made out of pure sapphire.
Wow.
So pretty interesting. So we have kind of this reference to that, and so that's why it's a cord of blue, to remind us that the commandments, if they were written on sapphire stone, it's going to help us to remember that, and it's also going to help us to remember the throne, right, the base of the throne in God's kingdom.
Yeah, and the commandments, think about it as a vow. It's a vow that the Lord made from him to his people, and we, by just like our wedding ring, just by wearing that, we are accepting that vow. He's committing to us and we're committing to him.
Yeah, exactly. Now this is also what's called a double witness command, because it's mentioned not only in Numbers 15:37, but it's also mentioned in Deuteronomy 22:12, right? So it's repeated. So God's pretty serious about this. This is not just and if you want to kind of thing. Messianic believers, we see this as a direct command, and you're either obedient to it or you're disobedient.
You think about that scripture, we're in the world, but we're not of the world. Well, what does that mean? Because right now, the church looks like it's a part of the world. It's not set apart in any way. They don't, from even the holidays that they celebrate to the way they dress, like you just can't tell a difference. This is one way you can tell a difference. You're in the world, but you're not of it because you're set apart. You're wearing tassels. You're wearing fringes. That's very different. That and also the feast, which is why we teach honoring the biblical feast, which are more commandments that we're not going to touch on right now. But those are ways that you're in the world, but you're not of it. You're set apart. You're a chosen generation, a royal priesthood.
Yeah. So it should look different and act
yes,
different
you
as
should
well.
look different. Yes, and if you don't, then I would actually do a heart check and really pray about that, because your destiny could very well depend on it. Because remember, we said that scripture, Yeshua said, away from you, worker of lawlessness, I never knew you. So your destiny could very well depend on if you choose to obey. I'm obviously not determining that, but pray about that and ask the Lord.
Yeah. So a couple of neat stories that we're going to talk about too. I'm going to mention that kind of center around tassels. In Luke chapter 8, verses 43 through 48, we have the story, which is very familiar, the woman with the issue of blood, right? So it's really cool. Now, we know that, Jesus was out in the crowd and he was speaking, and all of a sudden he says, hey, somebody touched me. And his disciples were like, what do you mean? We're in the middle of a crowd. Everybody touched you. What's going on? And Yeshua was like, no, I felt power come out, right? He's like, who touched me? And what was interesting is that the passage says that the lady touched the border of his garment, right? What is on the border of a garment is the tzitzit, right? So she grabbed a tassel, okay? She grabbed a tassel. Now, what was with the clandestine nature of her action, right?
What does that word mean?
She was sneaky. She was being sneaky.
Whatever.
So she was, big words, sorry. So she was sneaking, trying to stay hidden, right? Now what's interesting, if you study the laws, especially as it relates to a lady's menstrual cycle, after her menstrual cycle, she was supposed to be, from the beginning of her cycle, she was considered impure, ritually impure for 7 days. Now, anything, if she were to, if somebody were to touch her or something like that, they would be considered ritually impure as well. And then there's whole things for that.
Wow.
Now, also, if it was an irregular discharge, right, and this applied for men and women, if it was an irregular discharge, and I don't want you to think we're picking on women because there's laws that men who have a seminal discharge as well, but that's kind of taking us away from the story. But if a lady had an irregular discharge, she was considered ritually impure for 7 days after, or she had to have 7 clean days before she was pronounced clean. Okay? So she had a lot going on. Now we know she had an issue of blood where she was effectively couldn't stop bleeding.
Yeah.
Okay? Well, what that meant is that she was not going to be allowed to engage in the public sphere.
She was considered unclean.
Yeah, she would be considered unclean.
Yeah.
Like lepers would have to announce that they're unclean. If they saw somebody way off in the distance, they have to start shouting unclean. So it was a very shameful thing.
Yeah.
All like this.
And if you remember, they weren't supposed to touch, but what did Jesus do? He touched the leper. He wasn't, what they called unclean wasn't what God was calling unclean at that time. They were taking the law and elevating it.
Yeah. So there's probably a lot there, but what was interesting is that she touches Zitzits and she received her healing. But that's why she was trying to stay hidden, because she was not supposed to be there.
Right.
And then what did the Messiah say? He says, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace. Right? So not only did she receive healing, but he also acted out in compassion to say, I'm not going to condemn you for this. I'm not going to condemn you for, seeking your healing.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
So pretty awesome. But the Zitzits were a part of that whole story.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yep.
So now, just a few facts about Zitzits, okay? I'm trying to find my board here.
Go get a crook in your neck.
Yeah. So it represents your dedication to God to live out His instruction, okay? You're telling the world by wearing this that I'm doing my best to be obedient to the commands of God.
You're saying that you're His, who you belong to.
Yeah, it's
You're
just like a
showing
wedding
who you
ring.
belong to. Yep.
Yeah. In ancient times, tassels were symbols of the believer's authority.
Yep.
Right? So we knew that the Pharisees, the scribes wore them, but a lot of folks wore them. That was just part of who they were as a people, being set apart. They were worn by nobility or royalty. In Esther 8:15, it talks about that. Mordecai's royal robes had cords of blue, had blue in it. In Exodus 19, verses 5 and 6, I've called you to be a nation of kings and priests. Right? Royalty would have tassels.
And then what's the scripture? We got that same scripture repeated in the New Testament. We are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation. So again, here's royalty. Well, what are the signs of royalty? These are the signs of royalty. When you are set apart, you're chosen by God.
Yeah. So they marked the wearer as being separated for God's service. We talked about that, just like kind of like a wedding ring. It's an external witness, if you will. And then what's really interesting is that in a lot of Jewish culture, it's customary to bury the dead with either one or all of their zizis removed, or they would take one and tear it, right? Tear it or cut it. And what that symbolizes is that that person, because they're dead, they can no longer observe the law.
Yeah.
Right? So you either remove the tassels, which I think is interesting because that you can kind of correlate between not wearing them. So if somebody doesn't have tassels, in the Jewish mind,
spiritually they're dead.
Yeah, they're either spiritually dead or they're not observing the law.
That's really interesting.
So something to think.
That is,
definitely think
I
about.
never saw that before. That's really interesting. So
Yeah.
by not wearing them, it's a symbol that you're spiritually dead. That's interesting. The one thing I want to touch on before Luther goes to his next point is women wearing them. I had a struggle of wanting to wear them myself, mainly because of pride. I didn't want to be wearing that thing. I'll be honest with you guys. I'm going to be real. That was exactly the attitude I had. And I remember telling Luther when he we were at Tabernacles, and he was wanting to start wearing tassels again, and he actually got his first set, and he was starting to wear tassels. I would say, again, this is the first time, the Lord had been preparing his heart and unctioning him to
I've been
go this
looking at them.
way.
I kind of thought they were cool.
I had no idea he was looking into them. And so he got a pair and was wearing them, and I told him, I'm like, wow, you look, they look great on you. Like, I like it. A man wearing tassels, it's attractive, but I was like, I don't think that's for women. That's not for me. And that was a private conversation. 2 hours later, a sweet lady that I had made friends with, she actually gave me my first set 2 hours later. And I was like, Lord, you're hilarious. I get the point. I stand corrected. It's not that it's not just for men, but it is for women. And God corrected me in that in a very loving way. And I knew the way that God speaks to me that he was correcting me. No, this is for you too. And so I started looking into the scripture. And if you actually look at the word, because some translations will actually say, speak to the men of Israel. But if you actually look at the Hebrew word, it's actually the same Hebrew word when it talks about eating unclean animals like pork and different things like that. It's the same Hebrew word when it says children of Israel. I think it's like in 3 other parts in Leviticus and whatever, just through the law, when it says children of Israel, it's actually the same Hebrew word. So if we're saying women don't have to wear tassels, then we're also saying, well, women don't need to eat kosher. They can eat pork and eat whatever they want. Dietary laws don't apply to them. So because there's different people that will say different things. I stand from the perspective that yes, tassels are for you. Women, if you consider yourself a children of Israel, link arms with your husband and wear your tassels. And also, as I've learned to make them myself. And when I was sitting at the table making them, the Lord gave me Proverbs 31, the Proverbs 31 woman. But it talks about how her family is clothed with dignity. Her family is clothed with honor. If you read it, it's actually a royalty family. It's a family of royalty. We just talked about royalty. What does that mean?
What are the marks of royalty?
Women, you wearing them and you making them for your family, your kids, and having them wear it is setting your family apart as royalty. That's the job that the woman, the wife, brings into the home.
Yeah. So there's another story here centering around Tzitzis, and it's David and Saul, right? And it's in 1 Samuel 24, verses 1 through 4, and I'm just going to read it here. It says, "From there David went up and lived in the strongholds of En-gedi. When Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told that David was in the desert at En-gedi. Saul took 3,000 men chosen from all Israel and went searching for David and his men on the cliffs where the mountain goats are. Near some sheep pens along the way was a cave, and Saul went inside to relieve himself. It happened that David and his men were sitting in the recesses at the back of the cave. And David's men said to him, 'Look, the day has come that the Lord told you about when he said to you, I will turn your enemy over to you, and you will do to him whatever seems good to you.' Then David stole over unobserved, clandestine, and cut off the corner of Saul's cloak." But we'll stop right there. So what's interesting, actually, one more verse. Let me jump down to verse 11. He says, "Here today you have seen with your own eyes," this is David speaking to Saul, "Here today you've seen with your own eyes that the Lord put you in my power there in the cave. Some of my men said I should kill you, but I spared you. I said I won't raise my hand against my Lord because he is the Lord's anointed." So what was going on here, right? So Saul went into the cave to take a poop, right? If you study it out, that's literally what he was doing. He was relieving himself. And David sneaks up behind him and cuts a corner off his garment. Well, what did he do? He cut one of the tassels off his garment, one of the tzitzis. And what did we talk about? That when you cut the tassel off somebody, you're cutting their authority off. You're saying that they are effectively dead, that they're not able to observe the law. So this was very symbolic what David did to Saul. He said, you know what, I could have taken your physical life, but I have removed your authority, your power, your spiritual authority. I have cut it off today, and I'm holding the tassel showing you that I did spare your physical life, but this tassel has been cut. So it's very symbolic what David did. And if you don't understand tzitzits and what they represent, you're going to miss that whole thing.
Amen. Yeah.
So something to keep in mind. Now,
Sorry if you guys are seeing my dog. He's a little hyper, and he must have got out of his cage, so a little bit distracting. So we'll start to wrap it up.
Okay. So tzitzits, I remember when I first started wearing them. I remember we came back from Tabernacles, and I had bought a few sets, and
Okay, excuse me.
okay.
I'm gonna excuse myself.
She's gonna run away with the dog. So I had bought a few sets, and I was wearing them, and it was easy at Tabernacles because everybody there was wearing them. So it was like you're around all these like-minded people, so it was really cool. But then we came back, got back to, regular life, work and all these kinds of things. And I said, well, I'm going to be obedient to this commandment, and I'm going to wear my tassels. And Monday came, and my job, I work in a laboratory. It's kind of like an office type setting. And so I've got my shirt, iron shirt, pressed pants, and all this stuff, and I've got my tassels, and they're very visible. They're hanging out there, and so I'm like, I was a little nervous because I'm going to go into this environment where nobody's seen me wear tassels before. Nobody there wears them, right? And I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb. So I was a little apprehensive, but I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be obedient. So I put my tassels on, I went into work, and I had, usually I go around and talk to the guys on Monday morning, how was your weekend, that kind of stuff, before we get the day started. And I had been in there no more than 5 minutes, and one of the guys called me out. He's like, what are those things hanging from your belt loops? And at that point, I got a chance to explain what tassels were, why I was wearing them, this and that. And after that, I think I had another lady come up to me that same day, because you know how the rumor mill goes. Oh, Luther's doing something different. Let's go check it out. And but it was really neat. It was a great witnessing tool. And after that, everybody's like, "Oh, that's why he's wearing them." And it's not been a big deal since. And every once in a while we go out in public and you see people looking, and people are probably curious. Most people don't say anything, but every once in a while you get someone, "Hey, what is that about?" And you have this great witnessing tool to talk to people about the commands of the Lord and share your faith with them and maybe plant some seeds. So if you were like me and you're a little apprehensive about wearing these in public because it's new and you might feel a little uncomfortable, I would say just go for it. Now I put them on and I wear them all over, everywhere, and I don't think about it. About the only time I'll take them off is if I know I'm going to be doing like some really dirty work, some really, heavy yard work or something like that, or, if you're crawling under a vehicle, wrenching on a car or something, I might take them off. But barring situations like that, they're on me from sunup to sundown. So I would encourage you to wear them. Now, a few practical things is, you probably can't see it, but here's one of my tassels, and this has got some green and brown and a little bit of white, and I've got a lot of different tzitzits, all different colors, so I can kind of match some of my attire and clothing, which I think is kind of fun. They all have the cord of blue because we want to stay consistent with the command. But if you ever notice a tzitzit, they'll have these different knot patterns. Now these are the knot patterns, again, they're traditional, okay? They're not required, all right? All that's required is that you have a cord of blue in there, so you can tie it. My wife has got some that have beads on them, very feminine, very decorative, and all like that. But these knot patterns represent certain things. Now, the way we have, my wife, I should say, I have not learned how to tie these yet. My wife has learned how to tie them, is that there's certain numbers of knots, and they represent the name of God. The Yod, He, Vav, He. If you look at the Gematria, which is the numerical equivalent of each letter, right? That's what is represented here. So that's kind of a fun thing. Again, it's not required to fulfill the commandment, but it's more of a traditional thing. And depending on what sect of Judaism you might look at, they have different knot patterns and so on and so forth. So you can kind of get lost in some of that stuff, but they're not too hard to make. Even my young sons have made them. My daughters make them. You just sit down and it's kind of relaxing. My wife will put on some worship music and she'll just tie a set of tzitzits. And, we wear them, we make them all different colors and just kind of have fun with it. So now you'll notice there's a little silver clip here. And this is something I've seen a lot of the men at Tabernacles do, because you're wearing these all day, and usually it's just a little slip knot, which I don't know if I can undo here. There's a little slip knot it's got a loop, right? You can kind of see the loop here. Hopefully you can see that on camera. But we'll just run that through on this little clip. And then now, once that's set, I can just clip this right on my belt loop, on and off, really easy. So I like to do that. So I get these little clips. These are no affiliation with the brand or anything like that, but they usually find them by keychain stuff, keychain accessories and like hardware stores and things like that. And it's a company called Night Ize, I-Z-E, or I-T-Z-E, or something like that. And they come on this little ring, and it'll have like 4 or 5 of these on there, so you can hook all your keys. Well, I take them off, and they're the perfect size, and you can just kind of clip them right onto your belt loops. So that makes it really convenient to just click them on and off. So the only time it's ever been an issue is if you fly in an airport, then they're gonna be like, what's that metal weird stuff hanging from your belt loop? So anyway, but that's kind of a neat little thing that I do to just kind of make it convenient, make it easy. And you just clip them on and you're good to go. So I can show you a tallit here. Let me grab this. Now these tassels here, you can see them, these are quite a bit larger, because this is on a tallit, so they're a lot bigger. But again, we have the different knot patterns, right? Blue and white is the most traditional style that you can find, but you can find so many different colors and things like that. So now, one of the things that Yeshua didn't like about what the Pharisees were doing is he says, you broaden your phylacteries. This was the little scripture boxes they would tie to their arm and their forehead. But also, the tassels on their garments were really crazily long because they wanted to be showy about it. Okay, and I would say you don't want to be showy, but you don't want to have them like an inch long where they're barely visible either, because they are an outward sign. So, try to balance that. Like, we're not trying to show off, but we're not trying to hide either. So, when you make them, because again, there's no length requirement, you can make them however you want. I've seen some folks, they'll take like a little square that fits over their belt loop, and that'll have all 4 on just that little square, and so they're just wearing on one side. That's kind of a different interpretation, but again, they're trying to adhere to that command. So I think there's a lot of grace in that. So just a quick rundown about tzitzits. If you guys have any questions, feel free to email us. We'd be happy to talk about it. Maybe point you into some directions where you can find some. There's lots of stuff on like Etsy, eBay. You can search online, to find these things. Or it's, go down to your local craft store, buy a bunch of thread, and make your own. It's really not too terribly difficult. So have fun with it. But hopefully that is a blessing to you. And again, just Messianic believers, Christians, if you read the command, and we recognize that as a direct command, is that to wear these tzitzis, to be a witness that, hey, I have a special relationship with the Lord. It's an outward sign, and it's also a great witnessing tool. So consider that and go from there. So we will see you on the next video, and until then, blessings and shalom.